Hey, I'm Nick,
And I'm Graham.
and this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast. I think we're on episode 7 now. Um, Graham, you and I were just chatting about remote work, right? That's obviously since COVID times a huge
The
change.
hot topic, yeah.
Yeah, and you had an opportunity to kind of be working at a company that was remote first before the pandemic, and had some insights into how they were structuring things before this was a huge shift. So I got to share some context about that, some experiences there.
Yeah, it was interesting. As the pandemic started and everyone switched to work from home, and there was quite a panic around that. I remember writing a short blog post and just sharing some thoughts about what it's like to manage as an already work from home manager. And I always hoped that helped. And I think I did get a fair amount of feedback on it. It's interesting to see, 3 years later, 3 years, I guess it's been about 3 years. Yeah. Wow.
That
And
pandemic vacuum of time, right? Yeah.
yeah, and more people have had experience with this, and they've got their own things that have come out of it. And yet I still can't help but feel like work from home, remote first managers are still figuring out how to take everything they knew about managing in person in an office and translate that to remote. And I think there's been some mistakes made in terms of just trying to replicate the same thing in a more Zoom environment. And I think that I'm really hoping that some of what we say today helps people step back and think about how they approach their team with a remote mindset.
Right. And I certainly had two takeaways, one in particular from our chat today where I'm like, man, I have to go change this right away because I can do better. So really insightful for me. I hope that, people watching or listening also get a huge benefit from it. And as always, if you're watching this, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. And if you're listening, on Spotify or anything else, subscribe there as well. That'd be awesome. And we hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next time.
Appreciate it. See ya. A lot of people now post-pandemic are really pushing for like work from home or hybrid models now
Right.
that we've all discovered the benefits of working from home or remotely. But more recently, Elon Musk has staged like a full-scale attack on work from home. And I don't know if you've read any of the stuff he says about it, but basically if you're working from home, you're not working and it's not effective and it doesn't work for an organization. So I'm curious how that's going to have an effect on it. Will it tip the scales between orgs that wanted to make everyone come back in the office but were struggling because so many people were refusing, or at least politely saying,
Right.
we like the way it's working now? And a lot of evidence I've seen speaks to it, people working very efficiently from home. We're not spending hours in cars commuting. It's less disheartening, right? When you can mix stuff into your day, errands you need to run, whatever. If you actually, most people get more effective work done. Buddy of mine said this really well when he was a remote worker before all of this went down. He's a programmer and he was doing that remotely. And he was like, when I'm in an office, I feel the pressure of being in the office. And so if I'm working away on a problem and I'm trying to come up with a solution and I'm coding and I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting stuck. And I think most people who have written code know that feeling when you're trying to force something. If you're in the office, like, what do? You just have to keep trying and getting more frustrated. And he just said, when I get stuck, I close my laptop, I go do something else. And when the solution or the problem that I was having kind of comes to me later in the evening after dinner, I can pop up in the laptop and come up with a solution and be done in 5 or 10 minutes. And I've delivered the thing, right? Instead of forcing it for 2-3 hours in an afternoon and feeling stuck. And I thought that was really interesting. But now I just can't help but wonder if Elon's going to tip the scales and have people kind of getting in line in terms of work from home doesn't work.
Yeah, I haven't personally read, like, I see the highlight. Can't speak. Sorry. I see the headlines, not the highlights. I see the headlines come out, and I don't know. Like, I guess it bothers me enough that I know that if I go to read the articles, I'm probably gonna have some I don't know, some response to it that I'm not going to feel comfortable with. So I actually avoid reading it. Um, but I do think that's very interesting because the the stance on it is so aggressive from his perspective. The only, and this is, I'm going to say a data point that I think I'm going to represent properly, but probably will not say it completely accurately. But I think there is data from Microsoft that there was something, and if you know the stat, please like correct me on it. But I think it's something like 80% of employees think that they are effective at remote working, and apparently 80% of managers think the opposite of the people that they manage. Um, some like wild stat like that. I don't know why it's both like how it magically is 80% in both categories, but um, kind of interesting, right? That people think they're more effective working remotely, but the manager's perception of that effectiveness is not the same.
Neither of that is referencing any data. I, I want to see, like, yeah, I mean, I get the impression that somebody is not delivering as effectively or whatever, but I want to see, like, who was out there measuring their team's like sprint velocities or
Right.
their delivery cadence between before and after kind of work from home or hybrid models.
And the thing I mentioned is strictly a perception thing, right? So in neither of those like stats is it like employees were actually more effective or managers said they were not. It was just like the perception of
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
being effective, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't personally have any reason to believe, like, I'm not just saying this in case someone I manage is listening, but like I I feel like I work in high trust teams and basically always have. So I never have, it's never crossed my mind where I'm like, I wonder if people are actually working. Like, I, it just, it seems kind of bizarre to me that they just wouldn't be working. I don't know.
Yeah, that's assuming best intentions, uh, right?
Try to do
People
that.
generally like want to. I don't know very many people who want to like freeload on the system, and like get paid. Like, I don't know. Most people I talk to say being bored sucks and being slow and under delivering like it sucks. So
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So I can any job I've had ever, I can think of days where it's been slow, where I have felt bored. It happens, right? Um, the f- I totally agree with the statement you just made, that that feeling of being bored. I I could not imagine being paid for a job and just being like, I'm gonna do nothing because I'm bored, and just like sit at a computer and do nothing, or just like scroll through social media feeds 8 hours a day, get a paycheck. I would go nuts. Like, could not do it.
right. What there was companies building remote teams before the pandemic. I mean, when I worked at Circle CI, we had a Toronto office, but my I joined a few months after the things started locking down. So I don't
Right.
know what work was like before except what people have to tell me. And my impression was the Toronto office was mostly filled with salespeople that needed to go in or whatever, but the engineers really only went in every once in a while, usually to see other people. But then they'd get there and realize no other engineers were in that day and not really go back. And that was before.
Right.
So, like making use of engineering talents not restricted to very specific geo boundaries has been identified as beneficial long before 2020 came around.
Yeah, and I think from chatting with you, I don't know, I guess it was must have been after you started at Circle, right? I remember talking with you about having teams composed of people across different geos. Um, Now, when we worked at Magnet Forensics at the time, um, basically remote work was not really a thing. And like, this is not me bashing them or anything like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was like when a couple people had asked, we had to think about it on a case by case basis, because like any startup, when you're kind of when the first time something comes up, you're like, oh crap, what do we do about this? Like can we support this? So for a lot of my career before the pandemic, it was really like remote work is it's kind of this new thing that I don't really know how it's going to work. And it was really interesting to talk to you because at Circle, my understanding is that basically it was remote first and not just people saying that because it's post pandemic times, but remote first because that was just how they decided it would work.
I think the co-founders of the original company were in separate geos. I think it was like one is in California and one was in, I'm going to get it wrong, but New York or whatever.
Sure.
And they started the company. So remote first, literally, like as first as it can be.
Right.
But we hadn't, a lot of places, like when I think back to the magnet forensic situation, a lot of places
Mhm.
really hadn't leaned into like the possibility of unlocking, right, like remote
Right.
work or people working outside of specific boundaries. And so there wasn't an emphasis on making use of Zoom. We used some of, I think it was HipChat at the time, and eventually became Slack, whatever
Right.
it was. We used messenger apps to chat and connect, but that was secondary to meeting in meeting rooms, talking at
Yeah.
people's desks. And I think that the fear of anybody thinking of transitioning to supporting remote is those first couple of people are going to feel like outsiders.
Yeah.
And how do you bring them into the fold when you're doing retros with stickies on a whiteboard? And there's a lot that has to change from, oh, we do all of this stuff physically here,
Right.
to, oh, well, actually, we need to make heavy use of Zoom. I mean, I was in a meeting recently. I sit on a board at the college, and we did a hybrid board meeting at a technical college, and they were in a boardroom, and it was not equipped for like a hybrid meeting. So I was calling into the meeting from home, and it was calling into somebody's laptop hooked up to a webcam that was trying to pick up the video and audio for an entire room of people. And it's like, it was a perfect example of an attempt to support remote,
Right.
but without the like foundation there to actually support it. And that is the dark side of remote work. If you haven't leaned into anybody can be anywhere, and instead your thinking is, well, we're here but they're there, it's very different. It's a very different experience, especially for the person who's on the outside.
Right. I can think back. So Microsoft is, I mean, I joined in the pandemic, right? The pandemic time. So I've been at Microsoft, which is obviously a huge company, and only seen kind of like it feels like remote first kind of thing. I know it's not if like because lots of people were at the office before, but I can think back to magnet forensics when we had our kind of first like call it like I don't know if the word is going to come out right, but like a satellite dev office, right? Like we had opened up another office and we wanted to start building it up, and I can remember even that office being it was a hub, right? But I know it felt like for those individuals that when they would call into meetings that they felt like they were the outsiders. There would still be a room of them calling in to meetings and stuff, and the feedback would be that they felt like they were on the outside. And that's like a I don't know, it's kind of bizarre to think back on that now because I remember that being like I remember being like, how are we going to solve this? Because I know it's a really crappy experience for them when you have a room full of people that are chatting and the room full of people they're getting this huge benefit of being in person and body language and all this stuff going on, and then you have this other group of people that's just like we can't speak and why are we even calling into this, like this is garbage. That was I remember that being such a difficult problem to try and think through. I haven't talked to anyone at magnet forensics kind of since how any of that might have evolved. I'm hoping that since now everyone's kind of, I don't know if everyone's remote. That's not fair to say, but I'm kind of curious if that has just naturally gotten better because now everyone is kind of like the satellite to everyone
Hmm.
else.
Yeah, I bet it. I bet it has. So we touched on it briefly, but perception of people's work or
Sure.
effectiveness is one element of managing remotely. And I
Hmm.
think there's a whole bunch of room for learning just about how to manage individuals or teams that are remote. And I think that that's something that a lot of people were forced into, and they're kind of like
Hmm.
fumbling their way through it. Some of us were already doing it or had some experience doing it, and I kind of already had a bit of a leg up there. But I think the last 2 to 3 years have been a real pile of learning for everybody. I mean, on both sides of the table, but at least since we're talking about management, um, thinking about what changes between being a manager for a team that's sitting around the same floor of an office as you versus
Hmm.
could be anywhere. Did what I mean, you had probably a pretty drastic change. I mean, joining during a pandemic,
Yeah.
you would be a manager who went from having people around you to not.
Yeah, I can comment a little bit about that, and I think I want to follow up this with maybe a question back to you, and I'll get to it as I'm kind of explaining maybe a little bit of my experience on this though. Um, yeah, I think first of all, onboarding was very unique because I think for anyone onboarding and they're not used to being remote first in a company or just remote at all, um, going through onboarding and being remote is challenging. I don't think there's any way around that um, if you are used to in person stuff. So that was kind of a unique thing for me. And then another part, and this is a bit of maybe less about the remote aspect, but I kind of want to touch on it is like my my role also kind of changed in terms of what I was responsible for. So I was historically like kind of coding every day if I could, and then managing, and this was kind of picking up trying to learn about a space that I'm not going to be, have my hands in. So I think the remote part that I wanted to bring up related to that in particular was like whiteboards. Like I am a whiteboard person. I feel like I can't learn unless it's written on a whiteboard for some
Mm-hmm.
reason.
Yep.
Something I've learned about myself, and the lack of having that, especially with not having my hands in a system, meant that learning for me was really slow. Now, on the people side of things, because if we want to focus on the management part, um, it was, I think, maybe a little like I have great people on my team. So I'm glad that I was able to have one on ones and kind of build up trust relationships with them. But definitely, like, I didn't realize how much body language and stuff, like just the way we communicate as people, um, relying on emails and instant messenger. Um, I feel like because I have people from all over, different cultures, different on my team, I'm not even sure. There might only be a couple of people where English is their first language. So and I'm not saying that's an issue, but when you mix in like written communication and you don't have the body language and all this other stuff, there's so many opportunities to like just have little things go off and misunderstandings. So I think there's been a lot of challenges that I just was not prepared for because I'd never had to think about them. But the one thing I kind of wanted to ask back to you was um, about, I think something I've observed, and I don't know if I have like enough data to back this up, but I feel like onboarding for new people and more specifically like more junior people is extremely difficult to do for remote work. And I wanted your thoughts on what that's like. I can add a little bit more context if you're like, well, no, it's been fine. Just kind of curious if you've had any experience with that part.
What certainly it varies as much as onboarding experiences can vary anyways. Some
Sure.
organizations choose to invest in it and some don't. So I certainly, the first time I became a remote manager, it was going back to a team who I had managed physically before. So it's a little
Okay.
unfair because I didn't have to onboard. It was kind of a welcome back. You,
Yeah,
you
that's a
built this
cheat
team,
code.
so you're like, you already know what's up.
Yeah.
The joining Circle, I first had to get onboarded, but then I did hire many people remote through the pandemic, and we did a lot of onboarding. So we invested pretty heavily as an org and as a team into that. It was basically guided tours of welcome to the company, welcome to the domain, welcome to the team, and really well written out. Like I was going to call it an agenda, but we didn't want to put specific times on because
Okay.
everyone learns at different speeds, and so it was more so like by the end of the week you should know about these things. You should should have access to these systems.
Right.
That could be theme number one for week one. Week two, the themes might be like, all right, let's get you pushing code or pairing with engineers on the team. So we kind of had this like self-guided tour through documentation
Okay.
paired with a highly collaborative environment. We did paired programming every day as a team. And so it was basically, hey, we this channel on Slack is where we publish when we're going to be doing paired sessions or when someone's working on a problem. They drop a channel here and you can always join. Basically, I want you to just live in there and go meet the
That's cool.
team, hang out, see what they're saying. And I think probably what made some of this successful, I always told people during onboarding, I said, you're here now. I recognize that you probably are eager to hit the ground running, right? Prove your worth. Everyone always feels that. You start a new job and you're like, all right, I better show them that I'm worth, what they're paying me, or that I am what they hired, what they expected.
The
It's just like
exact opposite
you're in
of
a
what we said earlier, right? Like, I'm just gonna, now that I've been hired, I'm just gonna twiddle my fingers and
yeah.
collect the paycheck. Like,
How many people in their first week are just sitting around happily not soaking up like it? I don't know. It doesn't seem likely to me. So I always said to people joining my team, I recognize you're probably eager and in a hurry to deliver value. I want you
right.
to know that for right now, and in my eyes, for probably the first month, your job is to learn.
Mhm.
So I don't ever want you sitting around or sitting in a paired programming session and not being contributing, or like going and exploring some code but feeling like you're not really delivering value. I want you to flip what it means to deliver value on its head for the first month, and you are here to learn, right? You're here to
Right.
get up to speed. You're no use to us if you are just jumping into pushing code but you don't understand the things going on around you. So I think by doing that, it gave people space for at least the first few weeks to month to feel safe doing some exploration, right? Just check out the codes. Here's a list of all the repos that we touch frequently enough that it's worth knowing. Go pull them, try and
Right.
set them up and run them locally. Make a change locally that you have no intention of pushing to main. Okay, now let's go find you a bug you can work on. Let's get you to push that to main. Oh, you can't solve that problem alone. Let's get someone to pair program with you so you get used to our paired programming norms, and just kind of like built that to the point where, and everyone has an onboarding buddy, and the idea was the onboarding buddy was supposed to keep them included
Sure. Yeah.
in sessions. So if you got nothing else going on, you reach out to your buddy and hop on a call and do paired programming. And the buddy's job was to try and in the first couple of weeks invert that. So when you were getting on calls, the new team member would be the one driving and the buddy would be the one asking questions, critiquing, throwing out ideas, but not necessarily driving the session.
Interesting. So you said a couple things there that kind of resonate with me. I don't know if that means that they must be right or something, but I just thought it was interesting. So the way that you explain kind of the onboarding, like almost like documentation that's not like a tight schedule. It's interesting actually. At Microsoft, I'm helping drive one of those initiatives like that's cross org, and I I don't think we had explicitly said it this way, but I think you said it, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Like people learn at different speeds, but having a realm of like if it's a week or a month, like you should probably have these types of things like access to them, or you hopefully should have had the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z or Z.
If it's thematic, I don't know if anybody else, I'm sure other people have experienced this, but I can think of at least 2 to 3 times I onboarded at a job
Mhm.
and they gave me, whether it was digital or physical or whatever, they gave me a schedule for the first couple of weeks. It's like day one, do these things and read these things. Day two, read these things, right? And I remember it was always like week one, read these documents. And Monday afternoon, you've read them all. And you're like, hi, what do I do now? And then
Right.
they're like, oh, do the week one thing. And you're like, I did. And I've got 4 days of I don't know what. And then you want to dive into like week two, but it's, oh, there's some scheduled sessions and you have to go get access to these things that you don't have yet. And it's always like, I don't even see it as, oh, some people might not be there. It's almost always people are learning faster than you anticipated when you put that kind of timeline on it.
Yeah. So I thought so that's really interesting. The other thing um, that I think personally I want to see if I can take more advantage of is uh, you talked about like pair programming, right? So I know like in every place is going to have different opinions on how effective this is and whatever else, but I do like the idea that if people are at least interested in doing that, that like you could create a safe place or a forum to encourage it. I thought that was really awesome.
We were unique in being really, really pair programming heavy and
Sure.
getting value out of that.
Well,
Yeah.
I've noticed that for and this is kind of bringing it back to like the more junior folks, let's say, but people I have definitely found that people getting started, and especially if they're junior, the value that I've observed in the last couple of years is like they seem to get most of their learning from paired programming sessions where they might be stuck or trying to design something or just have questions about how they've coded something. And instead of putting it up for review and just getting blasted with comments, it's like, hey, like more senior person on the team, like could we chat through this? And they'll share their screen, walk through code. And when I have one-on-ones with people, that's where I hear from them where they're like, hey, I got to meet with person A on the team and we spent like 3 hours going through this. Like the time just flew by, and like they're just like they can't stop talking about all the stuff they learned. And I'm like, wow, like that's awesome that you got so much value out of doing that. So
We can come back to the onboarding stuff, but just I'm going to double down on my support for paired programming as like a cultural norm for coding. It was so wildly effective for our team. And some of the benefits that I think we got out of it that aren't necessarily obvious is our team culture didn't require much documentation. It didn't need to be captured and written down because
mm,
it's perpetuated by people pairing with each other constantly. And when you have different people pairing together on different days and they're sharing um, whatever code organization techniques, right? Like syntax techniques. They're jamming with each other while they're doing this. They're also sometimes chatting about personal stuff. My team members knew more about each other than I knew about people on my team because they spent so much time pairing. It was
right.
really impressive. So you're building direct relationships. You're percolating cultural norms and standards so they don't need to be reinforced and written down and taught. They just are, the culture builds itself and everyone orients around it. And that's how we see opportunities to improve processes because everyone will see the same problems because they're on the same
Hmm.
calls. And for the people who want to talk about, I'm not sure that paying 2 engineers salary to be on a call to build one thing is effective in like good use of time and value. We were able to basically eliminate code reviews, right? Because you've got multiple people, two or
Those don't
three
take any
people.
time.
So think about how long you put a PR up for, and then it sits while you wait for other people to do code reviews. And if you're doing code reviews right, you're waiting for other people to pull that code, run it, read it, critique it. Like it's unrealistic. I think it's old thinking and it's a load of crap to say you can't have. It's not a good use of our spend to have 2 engineers on one call
I,
solving
I
one
feel like
problem.
if that's kind of where you stop your thought process, I don't think you're giving it a fair chance to think through I think a parallel, like, kind of ridiculous argument is being like, writing tests is a waste of time, and it's like, it's a waste of time because you have to go write more code to go test things, and it's like, yeah, but if you don't test anything and have regression suites, then, like, you could be spending 4 times as long fixing bugs if you want, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think you can get more effective delivery out of individual engineers heads down delivering things, then I hope you have a team of absolute rock stars who don't need any assistance. And I hope you're okay with teams not feeling like they're building things together and everybody has their own project to work on, because otherwise you have to cross pollinate that knowledge somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like, I never it's my goal to, like, never I'm already doing it by saying never, but to not use extremes when I say, like, hey, like, always pair program or always do test driven development. I'm like, these are tools, right? There's gonna
Mhm.
be tools that you can use that are applicable in many situations, but I don't like saying always or never just because you have to acknowledge there might be circumstances where maybe not.
It-
But
I see a lot of like job postings and people talking about things exactly like your example. Oh, test driven development. I'm like, yeah, it's a good thing to understand. I don't think it's a good idea to go to any team and say, you will do test driven development. You can say, we need to have tests. Here's the kind of tests we want to have. We need these quality standards. But whether someone does TDD to get there or not, I just don't get it.
if you find it useful, and, like, I have many situations where I find it useful, but I would absolutely not define myself as someone that is a test driven development style programmer. Like, no. But
So, I mean, last thought for me, at least on the onboarding stuff, I get no credit for this. I attended a talk at CTO Craft conference, I think, a couple of years ago. Someone gave a talk on onboarding,
mm,
and they really changed the way I look at onboarding.
okay.
They basically said your traditional onboarding for most organizations looks like what I kind of just described, right? Like a schedule of things to be done, like a series of tasks for the person to do to onboard,
Right.
basically a checklist. And they said, what if we, and they have done this, so it's kind of a what if, but they've gone and done it. Like, what if we use more like a North Star concept for onboarding? And then you set these aspirational North Stars where the whole culture benefits when you solve this problem,
Okay.
but it makes onboarding easier. And I think the easiest example to reach for is, what if you set a North Star that says anybody could push production code on their first day, right? Then 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 you can work backwards from that to say, well, what do we need in place for people to be able to push code to production on their first day?
Hmm.
And you start figuring out, like, okay, well, they need access to these things. They need to be able to know how our processes work. How do you deliver to production? And so what that forces you to do is go document your processes, put easier processes in place, automate more things. And the
Right.
idea is, like, really the whole team would benefit from things making it, removing barriers to deliver to production, but also new people can come in and everything is so well documented, so well set up that it's so easy to understand. You don't have to give them a document where their first week involves like checking out a bunch of repos and then like learning a code base. It can be a push to production, can be like a doc change, it could be a character change in a typo, it could be moving a button, or it could be any number of things. But if you lower the barrier for them to be able to do that, you actually make onboarding easier. And I thought that was a really cool lens to put on onboarding. I haven't successfully done it yet, but I like talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's cool. The one kind of thing I wanted to maybe hammer on a little bit more, and it's still about onboarding, but the going back to remoteness, right, is I thank you for sharing some of your, experiences and thoughts on that. But um maybe from your experience, when people are going through this remote onboarding process, and um recommending, pair programming, and perhaps, like, read, maybe not prescribing the dates they have to read documentation by, but general feel.
Mm.
How have those people shared with you how they feel about going through onboarding? Like, I guess my question is, like, do people, are they cool with that? Or are they still like, I don't feel like I'm getting that value delivered. I feel like I'm stuck, or like I can't make the progress I want to see. Like, I'm just curious on the feedback that maybe that you've seen there.
I feel like most of the feedback I received was like, "Hey, this is some of the best onboarding I've experienced." Like, "Hey, I felt like I ramped up really quickly." I think it actually really comes back to like putting the control in their hands.
Sure.
So it different people did onboard at different speeds, but whether someone onboarded and was pushing code by the end of their first week, or they, took 2 to 3 weeks to really understand what we were up to before getting their hands dirty, so to speak, they all had the same feedback that I felt like I onboarded really quickly and became a member of the team really quickly, and I feel like I'm in a good confident spot. And that generally happened by the end of the first month for everybody. Hey, I feel like
Cool.
I'm a contributing team member now. So
Interesting. Okay, so I, I don't want to maybe direct this too much, but some follow up to that is, um, I think, again, I think it's more junior people, and so not just new to a company, but maybe more just early in career type of thing, maybe new grads, maybe interns, right? Um, One of the things that I think I have observed, I don't have like stats recorded on this or anything, and the sample size would be too small, but I feel like for the folks that I've worked with that have been onboarding remotely, um, if the documentation and stuff is all there and we have some of these onboarding processes, I feel like that part is okay-ish. Like, it can always be better. But one of the things that I kind of struggle with, I think this goes back to like a perception thing. I don't have any issue thinking like the people being onboarded are not doing work or anything like quite the opposite. I know, like you said, I know they're going through learning. I'm trying to encourage that.
mhm.
But what I do get nervous about, and I think I've seen this kind of happen enough, is that they're getting stuck and they don't want to ask questions because people don't want to bother other people. And I find it kind of fascinating because I've tried, like, not social experiments, it's the wrong way to say it, but like I've tried different ways to try and articulate this. Like, look, the entire team wants you to be successful. They want you to ask questions. Doesn't matter how I try to phrase it, how I try to present it. I still encounter situations where people, will be having one-on-ones and maybe we'll be reflecting on something, and they kind of bring up like, yeah, like I was kind of stuck on this for like a week longer than I wanted to be. And I'm like, well, but hey, like, why? Like, did you ask so and so? Well, no, I did. Like, I know so and so is really busy, and I'm like, but like, that's what you need to do. Like, you need to be asking people. So I don't know if this is just my own experience or if this is something you've also kind of seen where people are hesitant to kind of break that barrier.
Paired programming.
But I think, yeah, like, it's interesting because when they go, yeah, like, okay, like, I'll make some time. What they end up doing is they'll get a hold of, the more senior engineer, and they pair program, and it's awesome.
Mhm.
So I guess the thing that I'm kind of trying to figure out here is, like, I feel like that is one of the solutions, but there's a gap still. Like, how do you get them to do that and recognize that they need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm joking, but not. Yeah, I mean, you're asking about like tearing down the barriers that it's a culture thing, and like with any of those, you have to kind of start making little changes and running with them. You've identified the challenge,
Mm,
which is it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think most engineering cultures are like this, but it's, hey, everyone's busy. There's a perception that everyone's busy. Everyone needs to get their own stuff done. It's still, if you break it apart, it is still a very like individual. It's how do I say this? Like, it doesn't feel like a cohesive team culture if people are worried I can't bother person X because they have their own work to get done. Well, that's not delivering as a team. And it's not intentional, but I think that that's the way it is. And I've had to work with a lot of juniors, I think like you have, around what is the right amount of effort that you put in for yourself before you start asking questions versus
because that
spinning your wheels for a week.
because that is a huge thing that there is. I don't think there is a simple solution for that, right? There is a balance between you should problem solve on your own, or else you will literally never be able to problem solve. And when do you go, okay, like I need to ask someone?
Yeah, if you ask a question every time you get stuck, people are going to hate you. And if you spend a week or two trying to get something done that you could have just asked, your manager's going to hate you. So, like, what's the right balance? They're not going to hate you, but we know that this is wrong, and we know that this is wrong. But
Yeah, and
what's
it's
too
not
far?
like there's not like
It's
a exact solution for it, right? So it's tricky, and I that's something I try to spend a lot of time with junior people on. But
it's so contextual, and I think the single biggest thing for when I think back to my team at Circle, which was fantastic for paired programming, collaboration, this kind of stuff. I think we talked a lot about the most important thing is delivering the highest value we can to customers.
Mhm.
And so we did a bunch of things to really reinforce that we are a team delivering things as a team. So we had a WIP limit on our in progress tickets. That was the number of engineers divided by 2. I think plus 1 maybe for some buffer, but like you could not every single person could not have their own ticket on the board. It was impossible. And luckily, there was this cool thing in Jira where we added a field, like a collaborators field, so you could add your name to a ticket. So, like, I can still see what everybody's doing, and you don't feel like I'm not on the board, therefore I'm not delivering, which is a crappy feeling.
Yeah.
So
Wait,
you
I hate pair programming because it looks like Johnny's doing all the work and I haven't committed anything ever. So
right, yeah, and we're not to double down on that. We're counting team velocity. We're
right,
counting
right.
deliveries to production. We're not counting individual commits, right? I actually put a lot of effort into thinking about and never landed on a good metric for this, but I really wanted to capture in metrics collaboration or collaborativeness. Is that a word? I don't know. People's engagement with the team.
Right.
And there's always the risk. We've talked before about metrics and balancing metrics. And if I put a metric in place like how often you comment on code reviews, we're going to get a bunch of bullshit comments on code reviews, right? But if on the
Trailing
flip
white
side,
space.
yeah, like it's just I don't know the right metric for it, but I really wanted to reinforce with the team. I want to measure you as a team
Yeah.
player. And so I think that was huge. And then because of that, and this openness to say, like, I want people to be pairing, I want knowledge share through pairing, we had a specific Slack channel, which was drop in this channel if you're working on something that others could come and help you with. Drop in this channel and say if you're stuck on something that others could come potentially jam with you on the solution. And so this channel was always lit with people, hey, I'm working on this ticket. Or my favorite was people who knew things really well. So we would have like a React expert on the team, and we had a Clojure expert on the team because we were Clojure based at the time. And they'd be like, I'm about to do something, kind of unique that Clojure is really good at. But if you're not a strong Clojure dev, you might not know this. I'm going to do this thing. Anybody who wants to like see that or learn it, drop in this room.
Cool.
And people on the team felt safe to be able to take a half hour away from writing their code for their ticket to go learn this new technique, knowing that we were trying to invest in a team that had that broad shared knowledge of all the systems and all the things we were doing. So I don't think it was any one thing. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I really do think it is this understanding of like other people's jobs aren't just to get their tickets done. It's to help you get your ticket done too.
Yeah, that's I think a really good perspective. Again, like I like the idea of using pair programming as a tool. Um, I think that even though it's not something I personally try to do every single time I'm talking with people,
Hmm.
um, I think that the individuals on the team speak for themselves when they tell me like I was literally pairing with someone and here's how much progress and stuff I learned. I think that's awesome. So I think from chatting with you, one of the things I want to try and maybe double down on is uh, just changing the culture. No, but like trying to figure out what aspects of the culture I can lean into a little bit more and seeing like, hey, are there other ways that I can start framing this up instead of just telling people like, hey, everyone wants to help you. Like some of the things you talked about are not forcing functions, maybe a bit too strong of a word. I think the whip limit is a bit of a forcing function, but
Completely.
the like the channels and stuff like just I think getting more things in place to help encourage that collaboration. I think kind of speculating here, but I think that starts driving people towards like this is how we work. So it's not am I going to go bother this person? It's like this is the thing we do. Like we go to this channel or we say, hey, like I'm about to do this thing. Who wants to hop in on it?
I learned really early in my remote management career. I had this thing where I really believe in over communication, and in a remote culture, you just have to.
Right.
If you think you've said something too much, you've probably barely said it enough. And as a manager, I was always participating in stand up, saying all the things that I was working on. And I think it gave people this peek into like the life of a manager and all the stuff that you're doing that I have seen some really bad takes about how managers basically sit around and do nothing. And it always used to make me laugh because I'm like, if you knew, and I think I used to maybe show too much of that in my updates. And I would always say, like, I'm really busy. I got all these things going on, but my virtual doors open. Come to me anytime. And nobody would
Mhm.
ever come to me. And then they'd be like, well, I was stuck and you're busy. And I started to realize people had this perception of me as being like busy and not having time for them. And I had to change, like, I had to figure out how to change to give people enough information about what I'm up to, but not project this idea that I'm too busy for you. And
Right.
once I kind of figured that out, I started working with other senior engineers and other people on the team to try and do the same thing. Like, share the right things, but don't figure out how to temper this message of like, I'm so busy, I don't have time for anything else. I don't have time for you. Because I think that is another thing that happens in remote cultures more than anything is people see, if you're in an office, right, you can be super busy, but you'll probably get up and go get a coffee or whatever it is. I don't know. I would. And so it's easy for someone who was hoping to catch you to get your opinion on something. They see you get up from your desk, you walk past their desk on your way to your coffee, or they see you coming back with your coffee. Hey, can you take a look at this for a second? In remote culture, all they hear is like, I'm working on this. I'm busy with these things. And it's just so easy to feel like everybody's busy and doesn't have time for each other.
Yeah, that I had like when it was coming out of your mouth, I had to kind of stop there and have a an oh shit moment because I think hearing you say it that way, I need to make changes like immediately. And like I feel bad because when you said it, it was so obvious. So perfect example, like we were chatting a little bit earlier, and I was saying like this month for me has been a lot of planning, like with two teams across different geos. I have days where I'm waking up early for meetings with people in India and then staying up late for meetings with people in China and then India, and then a lot of my teams in North America. And I've been saying to people like I'm swamped, I'm so busy, my calendar's jam packed, I don't have time to breathe. Like I mean, that's it feels like that. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm no stranger to it. So like, I don't I don't really care. Like I actually enjoy working, so it's different. Um, but the message I'm conveying is like I'm assuming is people hearing like, oh, I shouldn't bother Nick, and I think if anyone from my team were watching this or listening, in one-on-ones, I hope I'm conveying the exact opposite message, which is like, I don't care what I'm doing. Like if it's even if it's a weekend, like I'm usually at a computer. If you are working on something and it's bothering you, like just ask me. There's I don't think there's anything more fulfilling for me than like just being able to like help. Like if I can walk people through challenges and help them understand something, like that feels good. Um and I want to be able to do that. And if it means like, yeah, my jam-packed planning day means I have to spend an extra half hour, I don't know, like in the evening, like I don't care. Like it's a temporary thing anyway, so
Hmm. Yeah, I think that what I learned through this was that it didn't matter how many times I said, like, please come to me if you have something, right? Like, it didn't matter how many times I said that. If the impression was I was busy, it's almost like people heard that as like a that part of the message as placating, or maybe just like saying what I think I need to say, which is like,
Mhm.
but feel free to message me. And people are like, yeah, right, like busy doing manager things. I'm not going to bother him with that. Nothing drives me crazier than someone on my team saying things to me like, "Oh, I've used up too much of your time already," or like, "Sorry for bothering you." And I'm like, you need to know, like, I have it written on my personal kind of like website resume thing, or my about me, I guess. I said, like, as a manager, I feel like my number one accountability is to the people on my team,
Right.
and I want everyone to know that constantly, so that they feel like if something should get displaced, it's not the help to them. It's my crazy calendar fire with all these other meetings that should and can get moved. Right.
Yeah, that's why when you were saying it, when I had this moment, I was like, that's what you described is exactly how I feel. Um like, the teams that I manage are my number one responsibility, and the individuals on the team even more so than like, obviously we have business goals and stuff like that, but I would want to be there for the people on my team before that, because without the people everything falls apart.
Hmm.
That's how I feel, and the message that I'm saying um is just not aligned with that. And I think when you layer in the remote part of it, like if I don't know, maybe this isn't accurate, but I imagine if we were sitting in an office together, all of us, and they could see like, yeah, sure, like I might be on a call or something, but I might be busy at my desk, not on a call. Or if I was on a call and you shot me a message, people could see that I'm responding to stuff like on
Hmm.
meetings, whatever. Like I will make time for people, and they can't see that when it's remote, and they have to kind of just assume like, and I guess I don't blame them now that I've heard you kind of say what I've been saying. It's really interesting.
There's other little things that you can do. I've done. I don't know how much extra they help, but I try really hard to, because I'm a firm believer in people needing to like take breaks.
Right.
But my calendar has I have to do stretches for my back, or else I'm not going to be able to walk when I'm like 40. And so I have a thing on my calendar that blocks time, 15 minutes every day for stretches. And then it says in there, like, if you go look at my stretching thing, it says like, not available for meetings right now, like got to do my back stretches. Maybe this is a good time, since you can't get me at this time, for you to go do some back stretches too. Like, um,
I thought you were
but
going to say there was like a virtual meeting invite so people could join you on a call for back stretches,
yeah,
but
I mean, we used to do planks at Plan Grid. We had like a meet at the ping pong table for 2:15, and we'll do planks and wall sits and stuff. It was kind of
that,
cool, but that's not remote.
people
Um,
at Magnet Forensics were doing that too. I remember. I
yeah,
I didn't, because I was like, I do my fitness at other times. I'm too good for that. But I think it's a good idea. Like people loved it.
but yeah, it's, I mean, it's a good chance to encourage each other to be healthy and take a bit of a break. But I'm trying to be more open in our Slack channel, um, with my Slack statuses, just in general, about, hey, like, if I'm going to go downstairs and make a coffee, sometimes I'll just throw it in my Slack status. I'll put a little coffee emoji and say like, brewing coffee, be back in 10 or 15 minutes. Sometimes I'll post in the team channel like, hey, it's a really nice day out. I want to take the dog for a walk. So I'm going to be away from the keyboard for half an hour. But Slack's on my phone, right? So you can get a hold of me. But I'm just trying to show people, like, if I go into a meeting, a stand up every day, and say, I'm so busy, I'm swamped, and they still see me saying things like, gonna take the dog for a walk, gonna go make coffee, I hope that people recognize that it's like busy and stressed doesn't mean like from 8 to 5 or more, 8 to 8 or whatever, like don't bother me because I just all I can do is like these things that are in my calendar and nothing else. Like I want people to recognize that we're capable of being busy and still balancing.
That's yeah, I think that's really cool. That's something I have seen my team do a bunch of. Less about the little things, I would say, but at least for errands and stuff, like people are pretty good about that. And I'm happy because I well, part of it's like if you're not accessible, then like it's helpful to know.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that people, and I'm not saying this sarcastically, I am glad people working remotely acknowledge that they should and do have the flexibility. Like you got to take your dog to the vet, you need to get groceries because for some maybe the grocery store around you's not open, like whatever. Like do it. Like do the thing. It's okay. Like we are working in different times than I think anyone's ever kind of expected before. So do it.
Yeah, this has been thematic of my management style for a while now. And it doesn't sit well with everybody. And that's okay. It doesn't have to. But I never really knew exactly what I was doing. And then our VP of engineering was giving a conference talk and she messaged me and said, hey, I really want to use your like philosophy in part of my presentation. I'll totally give you credit, but I really like your management style. Of course, I'm going to forget the name of the person now that I need to know, but there's a really famous,
Not that famous, obviously.
really famous bookstore owner. Um, but basically, like he ran this bookstore, and the motto, the theme was like, "Give what you can and take what you need." It's kind of the like the founding premise for like give a penny, take a penny kind of concept. Um, but when she said that, it was like, oh wow, that's so cool. Like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I subscribe to, which is sometimes you need to take. I need to go to a doctor's appointment. I need to go get groceries because I couldn't last
Mhm.
night for reasons XYZ, right? Great. Do that. And when you have the opportunity to give back, right? I want the kind of people on my team who recognize that they can take when they need to and give when they can. And
Right.
so that takes the form of some people can't give all the time because they've got a small child at home and that comes with a lot of extra time boundaries. But then, when they're at work and other people need to step away, they can really like really play backup and really step in. And you've got some of the people who, kind of like being in front of their computer. Maybe they don't have kids or whatever demanding of their time in the same way, and they're willing to fill in some of those gaps as well, in return for flexibility when they need it. And I think when you combine that with being very team oriented and everybody understanding that we're aligned around a single goal
Hmm.
as a team. I mean, single large goal could be whatever. And we want to make heavy use of remote work. I think like those all coming together is so cool. It's so powerful, right? Because you're like, okay, it's not a bunch of people trying to complete individual tasks in a set time frame. It's it's a bunch of people supporting each other to deliver what we need to get out for the customer
Yeah.
across so many different levers that we can pull. I mean, not every team can do this, but we got to the point where I was saying, like, push code at the end of the day, because if somebody else comes online before you, I would like them to be able to pick up your ticket and continue where you left off. So if you're 3 hours behind, you might come in and the task you were working on has been advanced since you left, because it's important to get out to the customer. We don't need to wait 3 hours for you to come online when we have someone sitting around right now that could be doing it.
Yeah.
And it was so cool. It just kills that sense of personal ownership in terms of like, this is my ticket and I got to get it done as quickly as possible. No.
It's interesting because like I I want to believe that every team could function like this, but again, like I can't sit here and say like, yeah, that's absolutely how it has to be. But if you have been in teams where it feels like this versus not, it is completely a fascinating experience to be in a team where you you just feel like at any point you could be like, look, I'm walking away, I'm going on vacation for a week or whatever. Like I'm doing something else. And you know that like here's the thing I was working on. Boom, over here. It's in someone else's hands. Full trust that everything just keeps moving. It's just really, really cool. When it's Graham, I'm gonna mess it up already, even though you just said it, but like when you have a team of people supporting like the team goals, not a group of people doing individual tasks, like just completely different. Seems similar, but they're when you've experienced both, you know there's a huge difference.
For sure. Well, maybe a bit of a tangent from remote work, but nonetheless, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I guess like so some of my takeaways on the remote work side of things, like I have one huge takeaway for sure that I like this is like a selfish thing that I'm gonna go try to figure out is like my my messaging has to change. That I don't think is like I don't know, like foundationally just a remote work thing, but I think the remote work amplifies that my messaging is shit and does not reflect how I view my management style. Um, so I'm really glad we had this conversation because I needed it was just so eye opening. So thank you so much. I know it might sound kind of ridiculous, like I'm maybe being a little bit over the top about this, but I don't know. I want to kind of watch the video after and see if my jaw went um or just the look on my face because once you said it, I was like, man, I am not doing the thing that I tell people on my team I want to do. So that was one big takeaway for me. And then the other part is really like the question I was asking you about onboarding experiences and people kind of being able to break through that barrier, which by the way I think is almost always a personal thing. People going like they're kind of creating this scenario where oh someone's too busy,
Hmm.
I shouldn't. And I think I have some. I don't think I have an answer there, but I want to double down into like how do I change um not change the culture, but how do I make changes to um kind of inspires the wrong word, but get people to be looking at ways of working that are more collaborative so that over time the culture kind of shifts to say that's just how we work.
Hmm.
So those are two things for me, I think. I want to.
Yeah, I think like I mean to wrap up, thinking about remote work and management, it the remote the in-person experience doesn't just directly translate to remote. And I think too many
Right.
people have tried to force that and take the in-person experience and make it remote, and just like doesn't that's the wrong way to think about remote. Remote has its own merits and its own pitfalls, and you have to like let go of the stuff you learned in synchronous like in office managing, and you have to reorient around okay, like we are remote. And so what do we need to do to make that effective, and what are the things I have to watch out for? So a lot of what we talked about today falls in my category of being remote first and leaning into the advantages that it has. I think as managers, knowing the remote pitfalls is really important because they're not the same as in-person pitfalls.
Mhm.
And I think it requires a much more astute monitoring of the patterns and behaviors that you see of people on your team. You can do that in person, but in person, it's so much different than um, if someone's less present remotely, like, right? Are they withdrawing? Are they struggling with a challenge that they're not reaching out for help with? Are they actually quiet quitting or whatever the hell that thing is? Like, I mean, and how you discern that is by paying so much more attention to like what people say, and also like I don't know, like engagement patterns, right? If someone is normally a frequent communicator in Slack and suddenly they're not, you can't just write that off as like, oh, like Linda's
Slack
quiet
wasn't
today.
Slack wasn't working, I guess.
Yeah, or even like if you've got a really chatty team channel and then one day it's not like you have to. It's taken me 3 years, probably more, to recognize like when you see something that seems out of the ordinary, you have to follow up on it because otherwise, there's a real difference between like feeling kind of stuck or having a bad day in the office and like languishing alone in a remote culture. It's like, it sucks. And I just think like managers need to really, really watch your people and over communicate and I was gonna say like over ask or over insert yourself into into things, but like maybe not to the extreme, but like appear more engaged and don't appear more engaged, be more engaged.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because when you're saying like watch your people, it's like, you know, it's literally not, hey, like I'm gonna monitor someone's work. It's beyond. It's not the work that they're doing. It's like it's their behaviors, right? And it's not to go, oh, like Jimmy's not Jimmy's not doing his work, so like bad Jimmy. It's like Jimmy seems to be disengaged. Like guess who's gonna help with that? Like you're the manager. Like you need to step in and try to assist the people on your team because that's your responsibility. So you have to be, so to your point, so much more in tune with what's going on because as you were chatting, I wanted to say, oh, it's because there's way fewer things than being in person to pick up on, and I'm like, okay, like maybe that's not true. Maybe it's
they're
not
just
fewer
they're
things,
different.
different.
And
Yeah.
you've and as an in-person manager, we've been trained to look for and pick up on different things than remote. I mean, we start some meetings with check-ins, like, hey, before you start talking, like, how you doing? Where are you at? Right. Personally, one of my teams I loved, we did text ups instead of stand ups. I'm still on the fence about whether I want in person like face to face stand ups or asynchronous. We do face to face right now, but when this team was doing asynchronous stand ups, we had a prompt that would pop up and it would ask you a bunch of stand up questions and you'd answer them and then it would post them in the channel. Kind of cool. One of the questions was, I stole it from another team, but what's your spirit emoji today? And you could like pick whatever emoji you want from the list of all the emojis we have. And it was really cool because it was a really fun thing for people to just like pick their spirit emoji for the day. But when you
Okay.
saw one that seemed to have a not positive connotation, it was this perfect trigger for me as a manager to be like, your spirit emoji is like a black cloud today. Like, what's up? Like, is the weather shit or like, are you really having a bad
Crying
day?
face again. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
That's really cool.
yeah, all right.
Well, and so just to wrap up, I think maybe for a follow-up conversation, I think we have a on this topic still something I want to dig into a little bit more. Um, would be maybe more around like I don't know what the right word here is, like the project side of things. When you have, like we talked, I think a lot about like the people aspects, which I think is really cool for remote work. But when it comes to projects and working on software that's cross geos and people working remotely, I'd love to get more insight from you about your experiences with that because you had mentioned, and I think this is important, that like remote work has a lot of benefits, but there are absolutely things that become potentially more challenging with remote work, and it's different than in person. Um, and I want to dig into that maybe a little bit more in another conversation, more in particular. I'm calling it the project side of things, but I guess I'm trying to touch on stuff that's maybe not um, individual, personal kind of things. Perhaps they're linked, right? I don't know. I want to kind of hear from you a little bit more on that in another talk.
Pair
Yeah.
programming.
Ah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, Graham. For those watching, if you do us a favor and like the video, if you thought it was useful, if you want to subscribe to our channel as well, that would be really helpful to let us know that you find the content valuable. But yeah, thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
See you.